Good morning and welcome to our Sunday service together. Whether you are new, just visiting, or being with us for a while, you are most welcome. Oh, these are strange times indeed, aren't they? Me sat here in front of my camera recording myself. Also, we're in the middle of a house move. We are downsizing and moving a total of 500 meters around the corner. So I had to scrabble around my half-packed up house and find an available chair and a quiet corner and record this today. Hopefully, by the time I watch this back and it goes live on Sunday, the house move will have completed and I'll be sat watching myself from the comfort of my new lounge. So we are continuing with our series looking at the parables of Jesus. Stories for all seasons, looking at God's wisdom for life through the parables of Jesus. Now, for those of you who've been following along, you'll be aware that Jesus often used stories or parables to get some of his key ideas across. And today we are looking at a particular parable found in Luke chapter 12, verses 13 to 21. In a moment, it will appear on the screen and you can follow along as I read it out to you. Luke chapter 12, verses 13 to 21. Then someone called from the crowd, "Teacher, please tell my brother to divide our father's estate with me." Jesus replied, "Friend, who made me a judge over you to decide such things as that?" Then he said, "Beware, don't be greedy for what you don't have. Real life is not measured by how much we own." And then he went on to give an illustration. A rich man had a fertile farm that produced fine crops. In fact, his barns were full to overflowing. So he said, "I know, I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. Then I'll have room enough to store everything. And I'll sit back and say to myself, 'My friend, you have stored enough away for years to come. Now take it easy, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool!'" Sounds a bit like B.A. Baracus from the A-Team, Mr. T. "You fool, you will die this very night. Then who will get it all? Yes, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship with God." Now, it's hard for us at times to get the full force of this parable and the impact it would have had upon Jesus' hearers. You see, Jesus told these stories because he wanted to shake things up, to get people to think, to challenge their preconceived ideas, and instead of sleepwalking through their lives, he wanted them to understand that there was a deeper reality at work. Jesus told this parable to shake us up, to get us to think about how we are living our lives and what really is important in the long run. I don't know about you, but I feel as if we are currently living through a period of huge uncertainty. Whatever your New Year's resolutions were for January 2020, I'm sure they never took into account the worldwide storm that has been coronavirus. It has certainly shaken us to the core, both individually and as a society, and it's led to a lot of fear and uncertainty, in particular in relation to our finances and our health. Our daughter has been working in Australia for the last 6 months, and we suddenly found out last week that her return flight had been cancelled due to the airline facing bankruptcy. The travel industry itself has been devastated, as well as many other businesses, and I know from recent government information that hundreds of thousands are facing job losses and financial worries. Our government is spending billions to help kickstart our economy to try avoid a damaging recession. As we slowly move out of lockdown and come to terms with the new normal, it has caused many of us to consider what is really important in life and where our security comes from. If any of that applies to you and you are concerned for your financial future, then you've come to the right place. Because that's what was going through the minds of the key characters in this parable. And the answers that Jesus gave are just as relevant and helpful for us today. This parable raises a number of key questions which help us to get to the heart of what Jesus is trying to say, and we will work through them one by one. Now, the first question raised by this parable is, who is Jesus to you? You see, the parable that we've just read was triggered by the situation that we saw in verse 13, when someone in the crowd cried out to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide my inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Now, this might seem a strange question to start with, but before Jesus deals with the financial inheritance question, he asks the man, "Who am I to you?" This is the same question that he asked Peter in chapter 9, verse 20. "Who do you say I am?" Now, Jesus was quite popular with the crowds at this time. Luke tells us that there were thousands present on this occasion. In a life without TV and social media, following Jesus around must have been a major source of entertainment. You never knew what was going to happen next. People being healed, 5,000 being fed, Jesus walking on water, storms being stilled, and public figures being brought down a peg or two. It was definitely entertaining. Yet through it all, Luke keeps showing us that Jesus is more than just a teacher or a good person. It was quite normal, you see, for religious teachers to be involved in settling family disputes and questions in relation to inheritance. And it gives us an insight into the thinking of the man who asked the question in the first place. To him, Jesus was simply another religious teacher who could help settle an inheritance question. Yet Jesus' initial response to him and the parable he goes on to tell shows us that he is so much more than that. So often we fail to see Jesus for who he really is, and we limit our interactions with him on our own terms. Jesus doesn't simply want to tinker around the edges of our lives. He wants to totally transform us. He doesn't want to simply give us a few tips on money management. He wants to breathe life into our bones and to bring us fullness and wholeness and completeness that cannot be found anywhere else. Sometimes we're afraid that if we acknowledge him for who he really is, then we will have to give up control and will no longer be in charge. The truth is that we were never really in control in the first place, and coronavirus has shown us this. Jesus said, "I am more than you can ask or imagine. If anyone is tired or thirsty, come to me and I will give you rest." Many of you will know some of the challenges I've faced over the last few years with regard to my mental and physical health. Throughout it all, and particularly during lockdown, I felt the desire within me to withdraw and hide away from God and people. But throughout this period, Jesus has gently reminded me that he is more than I think he is, and that I can trust him with every area of my life. So this morning, I believe Jesus is asking you the same question. Who am I to you? Or put another way, will you trust me with all that I can be in your situation? When dealing with our fears and worries, especially over finances, it can be easy to look for a quick fix, a quick loan, or to bury our head in the sand and to hope it all goes away. Today, Jesus holds out the hope of change and transformation as we surrender our lives to him. The second question this parable raises for me is, where is your security? For many people, it might seem a tad unfair that Jesus calls the rich man in the parable a fool. Wasn't he doing the right thing in trying to provide for his future? He worked hard and was successful and was building on that success. What was wrong with eating, drinking, and being merry? Now, you could argue that the rich man was being wise and responsible. He had a thriving farming business. His land has produced so much he doesn't have enough storage space. So he plans to pull down his barns and build bigger ones to store all his grain and goods. Then he will have enough savings set aside for the future and will be set to enjoy his golden years of retirement. In today's financial climate, he would be seen as a positive example to follow and would probably be on daytime TV giving financial advice. He has worked hard and saved wisely. Now he can sit back and relax and enjoy the fruits of his labor. That seems fair, doesn't it? Well, not exactly. There is one important thing that this rich man had not planned for, and that is dying and coming face to face with God. In verse 20 it says, "But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself?'" The rich farmer is a fool not because he is wealthy or because he saves for the future, but rather because he believes that he can bring security to his life with his many possessions. He is blind to the fact that his life is not his own, that his life belongs to God, and that God can demand it back at any time. The rich farmer is just like me, in that I too am attracted by materialism and things. No matter how much we have, we are always aware of things we don't have. Every day we are faced with thousands of adverts showing all the products we need to complete our lives, and so we feel that we never quite have enough. Like the rich farmer, we are tempted to think that having large amounts of money and possessions stored up will make us secure. Over the last months, we have learned that no amount of wealth or property can really bring us the security that we long for. No amount of wealth can protect us from illness or disease or a tragic accident. No amount of wealth can keep our relationships healthy and our families from falling apart. In fact, wealth and property can easily drive a wedge between family members, as in the case of the two brothers at the beginning of this story, who were fighting over who was going to get which part of the inheritance. Most importantly, no amount of wealth can secure our lives with God. In fact, Jesus repeatedly warns that wealth can get in the way of our relationship with God. He says, "Take care, be on guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." It's not that God doesn't want us to save for retirement or future needs. It's not that God doesn't want us to eat, drink, or be merry and enjoy all that God has given us. We know from the Gospels that Jesus spent time eating and drinking with people and enjoying life. However, the good news that this parable is highlighting is that we can find complete security in God. In Psalm 62, this is what David says, "Truly, my soul finds rest in God. My salvation comes from him. Truly, he is my rock and my salvation. He is my fortress. I will never be shaken." If you read the rest of the psalm, you will see that David was going through a tough time. Yet right in the middle of this, he's able to find security, strength, peace, and rest. He has learned to place his trust in God. So this second question that Jesus raises in this parable is an important one to consider. Where is your security? I have found for myself that this is both a future, once for all element and an ongoing daily element. I answered the first element when I was 15 years old and surrendered my life to Jesus. I'm totally secure in the knowledge that whatever happens, I will spend eternity with him. The second daily element of finding security in the midst of storms and challenges is an ongoing battle for me. Each day throws up new opportunities to trust in Jesus and in the strength he provides. The Apostle Paul, in his letter to the Philippians, found the same to be true. In chapter 4, verses 11 to 13, he says, "For I have learnt to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through Him who gives me strength. As we lean into Jesus, we find what we need for that day. Jesus is offering us security, a security that we can build our lives on. The third and final question that this parable raises for me is the question, is it really all about you? The rich farmer is also considered a fool because he appears to live only for himself. Have a look at the language used. When the rich man talks in the parable, he talks only to himself, and the only person he refers to is himself. What should I do? For I have no place to store my crops. I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store all my surplus grain. And I will say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. Now it's fair to say the rich man's land has produced a great harvest year after year, yet there seems to be no gratitude to God or to the workers who have helped him plant and harvest his bumper crop. He has more grain and goods in storage than he could ever hope to use, yet seems to have no thought of sharing it with others, and no thought of how God might like him to use it. His selfishness has made him blind to the fact that his life and possessions are not his own, that his life belongs to God, and that God can demand it back at any time. We experienced some of this selfishness at the beginning of the lockdown, when there was a shortage for a while of basic items like toilet paper, pasta, and paracetamol. Some people were hoarding and stockpiling huge amounts, more than they could ever need, and the result was that a few people had loads while many went without. The picture on the slide that comes on in a moment will show the tragic moment a pensioner is forced to buy tissues after shelves were stripped bare of toilet paper amid the coronavirus panic. Selfishness has been a common theme in the news over the last 6 months, as we have all been called upon to do our bit to care for the weak and vulnerable in society, and to slow down the spread of coronavirus, whether it be wearing masks, routinely using sanitizer, or social distancing. Too often we have become angry when we've had to give things up, the freedom to go where and when we want, to have a holiday, to visit with friends and family. Now, to be fair, this selfishness has also been contrasted by enormous acts of kindness, self-sacrifice, and courage. People have come together to sing across balconies in Italy, or setting up community support WhatsApp groups and buying in the groceries and shopping for those who've been shielding. There have been spontaneous random acts of kindness, and mentalhealth.org.uk tells us the added benefit of helping others is that this is good for our own mental health and well-being. It can help reduce stress and improve your emotional well-being. In short, doing good does you good. In other words, we've been seeing what Jesus was talking about in this parable, that we are meant to reach out and care for others, and not build up our wealth at the expense of others. This is the selfishness that Jesus is challenging in this parable. The rich farmer ignored or simply didn't care about others around him who might be struggling. Instead, he was more concerned about securing his own future and making sure he had plenty. The rich man learns the hard way what the writer of Ecclesiastes realized. Quite simply, you can't take it with you. All that we work so hard for in life will end up in someone else's hands. And as Ecclesiastes 2 verse 19 says, and who knows whether that person will be wise or foolish? Yet they will have control over all the fruit of my toil, into which I have poured my effort and skill under the sun. On another occasion, Jesus was asked, in all the world, what is the most important rule to follow? He answered, There are actually two, and they are inseparably linked together. Can you remember what they were? Love God and love your neighbor. John 3:16 says, "For God so loved the world that he sent his one and only Son." God is infinitely generous towards us and loves us with a never-ending love. Once we have got hold of that and understood it and responded to it and given our lives to it, we can't simply dam that love up inside of ourselves. We were created to do the same as God and give it away, to be overwhelmingly generous with all that we have and all that we are. The rich farmer and the brother who asked the question in the beginning had both gotten the wrong end of the stick. They had experienced God's undeserved favor in their lives. They had more than enough to meet their needs, yet instead of giving away and blessing others, they tried to hoard it up and look out for themselves. So in conclusion, for me, that's why the parable starts with the first question. Who is Jesus to you? Have you come to personally know this overwhelmingly generous God who has given everything so that you could be in relationship with him? Are you learning to trust in him for your security? Are you being generous to others with all the good things in your life? This parable is all about priorities. It's about who or what is number one in our lives. It's about how we invest our lives and the gifts that God has given us. It's about what we see as the key purpose of our life, satisfying ourselves and our own desires, or loving God and our neighbor, taking part in God's heart to generously bless the world. Our lives and possessions are not our own. They belong to God. We are merely stewards of them for the time that God has given us on this earth. The good news is that however we are doing in this, we can reach out to our generous God today. If you would like to know more about getting to know this generous God for yourself, or if you have been struggling to cope financially and practically, or have been provoked to get involved in helping others, then Ray and Sylvia in a moment will give further details on how you can access further help. Thank you for watching and listening. I pray that you and I will fall more deeply in love with this generous God who loves us with an unending love. God bless you.